and like crime data is it's a whole, as much as we all thought like stuff coming out of the executive branch was tough, this is like a whole other ballgame. So thank you all for your diligence, and I can't wait to see what we have going on. So now I ask the question that nobody ever wants to answer. Who wants to go first? You didn't do anything, so you don't get to go on topics. Who wants to go first? I will call on somebody. Oh, great.
Turning up on to
I knew. Oh. Come on.
We're fighting for the
So you don't have anything like structured or thought out, and we kind of went off a bunch of different one ways.
That's okay. You'll have 5 minutes to talk about all of the ways that you went.
Okay.
There's this thing, and then if you need this thing, then here's this thing. Very good. The dongle, which is the best word that technology has given us.
All right.
Who's going to talk? This man.
I guess I'm going to talk for a little bit. Does this work?
Jamie.
Hi everyone. I'm Philippe.
I'm going to make this go.
Should we go?
This is what we did. Rainbow. So well, I don't know if I.
Can we just turn the back on?
It's a bar graph? Probably.
That's me changing things.
Do I need to do something with this?
No, you're good.
I'm good?
Don't.
I don't know that I'm good. Okay. That's fine.
It's not a value judgment. You just turn the back.
Can you change the input or something?
I mean, there's not like a ton to see, so it's fine. I might have to change the input. So we were the group that was working with the Boston Police criminal incidents data. Our task was pretty immersive. It's just like we have this data, no one can visualize it, it's there, but no one uses it. It's real time, which is really cool. And so we worked. It seems like the main interest from the DA's office is to have some form of mapping so that they can see, ideally in real time, sort of like, but probably also specifying some sort of time range, like where are incidents occurring, what type of incidents are occurring, and when. So we worked on a couple of apps that just put this information in real time in a map. Unfortunately, this doesn't work right now, but you can kind of see. It's a map of Boston, and there's red dots. Red dots representing incidents. The cool thing about it is the API, there's a few challenges that we'd have to get in the way, but this is just a very simple React app that just queries the government's API and displays the incidents. And there's it's really quite flexible. So we can look in real time, we can look historically. There's a ton that we could do with this in terms of working with the DA's office to display what they want to see. Now that we have the basic layout for like, here's what we need to do to display incidents. And then other people did a bunch of other stuff, so I'll pass it off to Kristen so she can talk about it.
Well, I can talk about some of the other stuff we did. So we had a bunch more people, and we decided to have fun going off in different directions, just each of us using our own strengths to kind of explore this problem from different angles. So we had one person really digging into the API and trying to figure out different ways we could query it, different features of it we could leverage. It's a really cool API actually, where you can feed it a SQL query and get the results back. So one of the things I did was use the API to run a group by statement where I grouped all the incidents by month and year and also by type. And playing around using a tool called Observable, I was able to generate some charts. So if you can see it, it's a bar chart that shows that, at least according to what's in our data set, the residential burglaries are going down over time. So hooray for us. Unfortunately, for a lot of the other types of data, the data is really sparse, so perhaps not as informative. But I think one of the things one of the desires that was expressed was essentially like a dashboard that they could put like on a big TV that could probably show this data from a bunch of different angles. So that's kind of where I came at it from, slicing and dicing the data in different ways and trying to see what could potentially be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton that we could do with the data. There's a ton that we could do with the data. we'd love to hear from the DA's office eventually, work with them on what exactly would be the most helpful, but with some pretty limited amount of time and resources, we could have a tool for exploring this data up and running.
And we're hoping that we'll be able to come back on Tuesdays and keep working on it. Because there's a lot of work to be done on it, and a lot of things that we can do to extend it and make it more to what they want.
They're into it. They've been like tweeting us all day. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah. So they're like,
Well,
they're like into the project. So
Take a picture of the red dots.
Nasser just had to go.
Incidents.
We gave Bond some chicken buttons.
All right, I think that's all we have.
Great. Well,
Does anyone have any questions? Pause. Justice, there's some.
questions?
Anyone?
Oh, sorry.
All right, cool. Good question.
Okay.
We were just throwing.
Okay, so whoever's next, I would ask for either someone who doesn't have a presentation or someone who can take a straight HDMI cord until we can figure this out. You're really anxious, so I'll let you guys go.
We had fun.
Straight HDMI.
Straight HDMI, or if the dongle is indeed the issue, let's try this. But also, I know you guys can just pull up your chart. So let's see. You made it go dark. Oh wait, we also.
It does seem to be the dongle because straight HDMI
I got
works.
another one.
All right, we'll try that.
I agree. A pocket full of dongles is the greatest thing. Could we enlist? Would you mind helping? We'll wait till we do this first. Okay. Not just yet. But if we can call on you two, that would be awesome. So we're Team Journey Map. We don't have a call or anything. So what we were trying to do was understand the expungement process and map out what happens once you decide, hey, the expungement is a thing, maybe it applies to me, let me check into that, to, hey, I've been expunged, and what happens next. And so the good news is the process we went through is we had a little intro to journey mapping discussion. What's a journey map? We looked at some examples of journey maps. If anybody remembers the Family Circus cartoons where little Billy is running all over the land, it's basically a high-tech version of that. So we did discovery where we talked to all the folks in the room who knew about the expungement process. And we fortunately had two folks who were able to help us. Devin and Sana did an awesome job. Devin, if you guys haven't, for folks who don't know him, is working at the community level to help people get cannabis records expunged now that cannabis is legal in Massachusetts. And so he had some experience with that process. And Sana, of course, has tons and tons of experience. And so for the other groups that didn't get much time with her because we were sucking her brain dry, we're not sorry. So it was super helpful at understanding what is the whole process. And so once we had sort of the components of the bones of the process, we had to start putting together our journey map. And it turns out that we ideated on what the process might be, and we encountered some really interesting questions along the way. So we ideated and finally came up with what you're about to see. And there was a lot of discussion around process linearity because different people go through the process differently and with varying degrees of success. And ultimately, it looks like if you want to be successful in this process, you should absolutely positively engage a lawyer. That it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to do on your own, which in and of itself is an interesting finding because there are all sorts of interesting ramifications of that, from being able to afford a lawyer to being able to find a lawyer, because there aren't a significant number of people seeking expungement, so it isn't a great area of specialty for law right now. It's emergent. And so finding a lawyer who knows their way around the process is actually quite difficult. So finally we hit acceptance. We had a deadline coming up, so we finalized our map to show you. And I wanted to show you just a couple of artifacts. That turns out this is the process as discussed by our experts. So it turns out so easy to map. This was part linear, part information. We learned fascinating things about where Massachusetts differs from other places. We learned that one of the number one things that needs to happen is there is no standard federal definition of what expungement means. So if you're in certain states in the US, you can go through the expungement process to have your records expunged. And at the end of the day, instead of having them deleted like you would in Massachusetts, you might have them sealed, which is entirely different. They still exist and other people can look at them. So the difference between private records, sealed records, and expunged records is highly significant, and it's done on a state-by-state basis. So we stuck to the Massachusetts definition, which is at the end of the expungement process, your records would be gone. We took all of this simple information, we put it through the lens of one person seeking to expunge their records. So someone who was at times a defendant and became a petitioner, and then hopefully becomes a successful petitioner. Do you guys want to hold up the map and we can talk to that? And if I can grab my two volunteers from the audience, or you guys, we sucked in the group related to usability on the website because they were interested in the process. So these guys very kindly joined us to create this map. So, and you're welcome to come right up front and center if you'd like. But what this is left to right is overall the stages of the process. You start off with discovery, and as you go through discovery, it's, hey, I've heard about expungement, but I'm not sure exactly what it is, or my mom says I should do this, or I've heard of somebody who had it happen, a lawyer advised me to do it. If you come out of jail, they're supposed to give you a pamphlet that says that certain types of crimes can be expunged. And so, who's going to be my discovery questioner? Are you going to do that? Do you want to do it? Can you do it from there? Yeah. So lots of questions come up in this process, and this track here tracks the emotional health up and down of the person going through the process. So you start off fairly optimistic.
Yeah, so the first question I ask is, do I even have a record? I don't know. And then, who can see it? Can I see it? Can I understand what my record means? And then, when does my record hurt me? So when in my life does my record even affect what I can do? How might I need, what might I need in the future? Yes. What might I need in the future? So,
Go around.
yeah, so do I expunge my record? Do I seal it? What's the difference between that? Can I afford a lawyer? Do I need a lawyer? Can I find a lawyer? And should I even get my record expunged? Because there are some caveats to having your record expunged depending on who you are.
If you are an immigrant to the country and you have committed a crime, and you might seek to have your record expunged, but they might advise you not to have it expunged because then it's just missing and no one can speak to it. So you could say, oh, it was a minor crime, it doesn't matter. But then they come around and they say, but we don't know what it was, so therefore we're going to assume it was something really bad. So in certain circumstances, you might not want to expunge your record, you might want to have it sealed. So that distinction was pretty key. And so just in the interest of time, given we're going to go just down the top of the first column and then I'll summarize the rest. Were you going to do the next section? Or? Take it, it's fine. Okay. So the next row below the roller coaster that you're seeing there is the actions. What are the steps involved in doing this process?
Yeah, so some of the things you could do here are to consult a lawyer, some form of expert, go to a Corey clinic, and they keep a record of past convictions. Or you could go to a court self-help center that'll help you actually work through this process, or you could find other legal services. And then you're probably doing a lot of research at this time and talking to family members and people in your community.
And then the last boxes are, what are the innovations we thought of along the way? Like an easy way to see your record. It's really hard to figure out, do I have one? Where do I get it? How do I get access to it? Applying for it is difficult. I need a usable and accessible website so that I can understand the process. Overviews of the process would be super helpful. Advice, if I really need a lawyer to survive this, someone should say that. Better SEO, finding and able to access the various documents that you need. Very often a document is mentioned but not included, or there's a PDF but you can't download it, or you can't fill it out online. So that was very confusing. For the rest of the process along here, just to summarize, a lot of folks apparently try it themselves. They fill out the petitions they need to, and because they're not being advised by a lawyer, things generally go badly, and then they fall back into a pattern of, okay, I'm going to work with the system and try and learn things, and it's positive, negative, and positive, negative along the way. I may or may not get a hearing. If I do get a hearing and everything goes well through the hearing, success. But the other big finding was you might successfully get your record expunged, but no one really tells you what that means. What it means technically is all of your records are supposed to be erased from the Massachusetts, from the Massachusetts court system, And the people in Massachusetts that knew what was going on and were involved in what was going on, they also notify the FBI that your records are supposed to be destroyed. But because the process is different and the definitions are different federally, sometimes it doesn't get expunged from the federal level. So there's confusion. So you can actually be completely successful and be completely uncertain as to what the next steps are and where it goes. So what we're recommending for next steps from this.
Yes. So some next steps, just to wrap it up super quickly, is we want to actually validate this map with user interviews and expert interviews to actually, see if the research supports our assumptions, and also like for these next steps, how can we actually implement this, in actual web design or other next steps?
And we would also layer in a process system map of what systems do people interact with along the way, and how might those systems be technically improved. But overall, we hope that this is, for folks that are going to be interviewing actual users next week, this is a good thing to have in your heads as you're validating. Does what you learn from them match what this is? And then it should be adjusted accordingly. So we consider this a draft until you've got more data to fill in. And that's Team Journey. Thank you very much.
Who wants to be next?
Any questions?
Oh, question.
What is it about lawyers that make things so much easier?
The process is very confusing, and so for example, even Sana, who's a professional expert, we said, she says, there's 4 types of petitions, and you have to figure out which one relates to you. So we'd say, well, how do you make a distinction as to which one? And she said, I don't really know. I have to look it up each time. And so it's just very confusing as to what applies to you and what doesn't. Does your crime warrant, can you get expunged? Do you actually have a record? Are things sealed? If they're sealed, how do you get to them? So
and if you get a hearing, you actually have a prosecutor, you have a real hearing with a judge and the lawyer on the other side, so you want representation on your side.
Okay.
So the actual hearing process is almost like a mini trial.
You can represent yourself.
But that's a bad idea.
It's usually a bad idea.
Generally, yes. So, and you just don't get much information back during the process. One of the happiest things that can happen to you is if you're under 21 and you're expunged when you committed the crime, your expungement record goes to a probate court. They actually write you a letter that says we are or are not accepting, we will or will not let you get expunged. And if they say no, they tell you why. That's actually the only part of the process where if you're not associated with a lawyer, somebody explains to you what the barrier is. Otherwise, it's just, sorry, you've been rejected. DA's office doesn't accept it, that sort of thing. So there are very few feedback mechanisms in the process.
The feedback mechanisms aren't something that we'd be able to help with too much, is it?
Knowing that they exist and they're helpful,
Yeah.
and it could be something that, like, technically you could have something squirt out a message, or if I were on a website that says, is my thing based on my docket number expungible or not, the system could then give you back, not just a yes or no, but here's why. And so some of the no's are like, it'll never happen, it's, it would be illegal. Others are, you need this kind of paperwork, and you need to talk to these folks, and you need to put in a J29 by midnight on the 4th when Uranus is in your house, that kind of thing. And so it's I don't mean to make light of it, but there are opportunities, I think, for feedback in the process technically. So one of the innovation opportunities we saw was overall it'd be nice if the process were easier, and in particular it'd be nicer and it'd be better if they were easier to do without a lawyer.
Right.
So
But if you go to the court, you still probably want a lawyer present.
you probably would in those instances, absolutely, but maybe some of the other steps along the way,
Right.
if you have the right explanations going on,
Reduce dependency.
might reduce the dependency on the lawyer, or move the lawyer back at the point where you need, maybe up front to get you started, but you could do this middle part and then reconnect. Because obviously, access to a lawyer and being able to afford a lawyer, and being able to afford a lawyer through a timely process
Kind of gates it.
can be limiting to people who don't have those resources.
Right.
Gotta go.
Who's up?
Oh, you want to do it? Go for it.
I think we may have solved that issue. I think so.
We can't know for sure until we try.
Anyone who worked on the policy guide for Hi guys. So our project was this JJ measuring the policy impact. So there were a couple parts to this particular project, and One was figuring out what is the impact of the current policy, i.e. how many individuals have records that are expungible today. And then there's the second part of it, which is figuring out how many more individuals are impacted or eligible based on the proposed expungement act. Now, we attacked this problem from multiple directions. We had a variety of different data sets. We had FBI NIBRS, that's incident level data. We also had Pennsylvania court docket data, and which we use because they have very similar rates of crime per capita as Massachusetts. So we split up as a team and sort of attacked it from both directions. And what I'll do is I'll actually have these guys who talk about some of the results that they found when they were looking at their respective data sets. So Don, and do you want to talk about the FBI NIBRS data and some of the insights that you got from that?
Okay, so I wasn't prepared to speak, but so one of the challenges with the FBI data is that it is incident level, which means that there could be multiple incidents related to one person, but we can't tell that with the data that we have. So that was one of the challenges. And so overall for the 2018, we were looking at over 111,000 incidents. Of those, we were able to determine that 15,600 around there were related to people who were 21 or under at the time of the incident or arrest. And I should also say that this also included data from the Boston Police Department because the FBI data doesn't include all of those areas. So if we assume that all 15,000 incidents involving people 21 or younger were expungible, which is a big question mark here, then we would be able to say that around 14% of all offenses in 2018 are expungible.
So on the other side of the coin, we were looking at the Pennsylvania data, and Abjit will give sort of his summary of their attack at that data.
Right, so we kind of had a bit of a head start where we've been working with this Pennsylvania data for a while, where we found a website that gives out the JSON files with the docket summary of each record, and we were web scraping that for quite some time, and we had a bunch of data. So what we did with that today was we basically tried filtering the data that we had based on whether the person has more than one crime, more than one record versus multiple records, which is what we wanted to check as to, based on the new policy, would the change in the number of people that would have their records expunged. And also the other thing that we needed to check was what kind of records were expungible where. So for that, what we did was we made a high-level list of possible crimes that we could expunge, and then we filtered down the data set. And based on that data set, we realized that if the new policy comes into play, then we have a 61% increase in the number of people from the Pennsylvania data set who would have a chance to have their records expunged. And now after that, we backdated to how we got that data set back to Boston and then made implications based on it.
So as data scientists, we often make wild educated guesses. Not wild, educated guesses. But by using Pennsylvania data and using Massachusetts FBI data, we made some intelligent assumptions and were able to back out that approximately 6,000 individuals for 2018 are eligible for expungement, and then what we can then do is start applying this particular technique to some of the earlier years. Of course, as with all of this data, there are a ton of assumptions and a lot of things that we need to validate in order to be confident of our numbers, but this is a good starting point for us to sort of work with. And so in the future, in the, all the Tuesdays that we have, what we'll be doing is sort of refining this number, validating some of the data we have for Pennsylvania. For example, is Pennsylvania really reflective of the rates that we see in Massachusetts, as well as incorporating other data sets as well. Any questions?
Have you thought about how you can get this to Code for Philly, who is also doing an event today on the same topic?
That is a great question. I will defer that question to Michelle over there.
We have not yet done that. That's a great idea.
I've been talking to Dawn, who was one of the organizers there actually today about their event, so like, it was really easy. Let's go.
Anyone else have a question? Great.
Thanks. Who's next? Do it.
More than two of us.
Do you want me to call us?
Yeah, Hard one to do it. Where's David? Did you bail?
Yeah, I think you bailed.
Damn. Well, there was five of us. Well, there is four of us are still here.
Do you want to take like 200 people from the audience?
Yeah, just stand it up.
Yeah.
Been iterating. Two of them were replaceable.
I'll just like nod.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did is we talked with the folks at Code for America National and got ourselves set up with a Twilio account. Twilio is an API for sending text messages and otherwise interacting between apps that you might build and the phone system. And so it's a really great way to be able to create an interface for someone that does not have access to a smartphone or a computer, because they'll be able to either call a number and hear something and respond to it, or alternatively go through a text process. And so they can text the number and get a response. So what we did is we got the expungement flow from the current Expunge MA website that Sana shared with us, and then spent the day trying to adapt it into the Twilio system. And now we will present on how we did it.
Yeah. So, a lot of fun with this project. Like Matt said, we had this kind of flow existing from CFJJ, which was super cool. So we were given this website as well as this PDF that kind of explained the flow and what was going on. And so we kind of attacked this problem in two ways. One was getting Twilio set up and working, and another was turning this flow and this website into useful text that we can send to people. So I'm going to talk about that second part first, which is Guy's part of the project, which was creating this enormous Google Doc of all of the flows, color-coded where to go, what text to use, and how the user kind of works through the chatbot. We took that, and Tara and I brought it into the Twilio editor. So this is the Twilio version of that flow. And so it's broken down. There's 6 major questions, and each question has branching, it has yes, no, maybe type answers, and there's kind of a lot going on here. I'm going to talk really quickly about the difficulties that we kind of had with this project, and then I'll give a quick demo. One was just Twilio in general. Getting Twilio set up, debugging it, and kind of figuring out the copy, how to send stuff back and forth, way harder than I expected. I'd heard it was used for a lot of hackathons, but all of us had problems, various issues trying to connect to it, get it working, knowing when it was published, that sort of stuff.
Second was the copy from CFJJ. So taking this website and kind of adopting it into SMS. This is way too much to put in one SMS, but this is the data that we had to work with. So Guy and Matt did a really good job of kind of organizing this data, throwing it together. Sorry, Guy and David. But for us going forward, if we're going to use this, we don't want to have someone from CFJJ take a look and kind of make it more SMS friendly. We weren't super comfortable doing it ourselves because there's like kind of semi-legal advice in here, but we did help it a little bit, but not really anything significant. That might be it for difficulties. So I'll say what our goal was with this chatbot was get it working end from end, and then let CFJJ come along later and clean up the text. We wanted to make it really easy for them to clean it up later. So here we can see the chatbot in action. I can say hello. There's this big block of text here, but we start with questions. Did your case you wanted expunged take place in Massachusetts? Yes. The chatbot didn't like me because I used an exclamation point. Apparently that's too much energy for this chatbot. But if I just use a single yes, great, we get to question 2. Do you have an open court pending case against you? You're serving parole, any other sentence? The answer is no. And so we can keep going down the flow. And once we were kind of in this flow, it worked pretty well. And we could see how this could be helpful to someone trying to get this information. You notice that I'm only looking at historical stuff. And that's because, remember I said one of our difficulties was Twilio in general. I somehow got myself in an infinite loop and can't get out of it. And all of my co-conspirators are stuck in different infinite loops and can't get out of them. So, things we would need to do to kind of productize, finish this project off. One, there's one part of question 3 that needs to be fleshed out. That would be over 21 flow. Just have to do the work for that. Figure out this loop issue. Get copy updates from experts, so take SMSs that are huge like these and make them kind of more SMS friendly. Finally, we talked about how we could abstract away, so right now the text is hard-coded in Twilio. We talked about if we can make some kind of web app where you could plug and play, or Google Doc or something where you could change that text easier for the CFJJ people. They wouldn't have to be able to learn Twilio. And also if you wanted to do the Spanish version, that sort of thing, it would make that a lot easier. Other than that, if they turn it off trial mode, this would work super well. It's really close to being done. So cool project. Thanks to Matt for kind of organizing it. And this is really fun. This is my first Code for Boston thing. This was really cool.
Do it.
Questions? Yeah.
Question. Please, question first.
When can this presentation start? Is that a good question?
No. For Twilio, is this wired to anything else, or is it just freestanding Twilio?
It's a really good question. We talked about, so with Twilio you can kind of make a Flask app and do different web stuff, and that would have had positives and negatives, because like for example we could have broken up these texts into multiple and had some delays in there. But instead we were able to get the entire thing working within one Twilio flow. So it's their super basic style chatbot. They have like a new AI version. We didn't try and deal with that. The goal there was to make it super simple. So we know someone who's not technical is probably going to pick this up. And even though this looks unwieldy, I don't even know which flow we're on anymore. Even though this looks unwieldy, this is the entirety of the project, and someone could come in and just change the text super easily.
AI and blockchain in version 2.
There's also a way in Twilio to actually create an IVR, so for visually impaired, for example. So if people can't read text, they can actually listen to it.
Yeah. Anyone else? Cool, thanks guys.
Is there one more after us?
Yes. Yeah, who has not gone? Three. Man, we're gonna run all over. Everyone's okay with that. I gotta do better timekeeping, sorry.
Okay. Okay, why don't you guys start, and then I'll end with
So we were looking at a Tableau and getting information from what we could see on the web page, but we couldn't access using scrapers. The Tableau, the trouble we had is that it uses a canvas, so it's not a CSS element. So we can see it on the screen, but we can't read it. Henry, do you want to talk about how you were able to get some of that?
So they do a pretty good job making it impossible to scrape from Tableau. Like they provide a scraping tool to get data off of other websites, but they don't want it coming off of their own website.
Can you guys zoom in? Use mic.
I'll try. Oh, yeah.
Zoom in. Cool. Well, you can zoom in my voice, but yeah, there we go. So yeah, this is all in a canvas element. It's behind the glass. They're doing their best to make sure you can't scrape it because that's their job. So we looked at the HTTP log when you actually load the page, and we found one fairly cryptic post request that turns out to give at least the data that it wants to use to populate the tables that it is going to show you. And you can actually then select which things you want to look at, and it updates this after 10 to 15 seconds, and it also updates the result of that post request. So that's about as far as we got, and then also Mike made a script to be able to actually parse the output of that request. So we were able to download all of the statewide data about various offenses from 2018 and 2019, but we weren't able to parse the per county data for each offense, because to do that we would have to sort of change this view on the actual portal, then repeat the post, and then change it, then repeat the post, and change it. It's maybe possible that someone could make a Firefox add-on that does this, because Firefox can intercept post requests, and they all have tokens in them, so it would be pretty hard to fake with a Python application. But while we were doing this, we also had another sub-team.
Okay. So, did you want to talk?
No, go ahead.
So, Cesar and I and two others all worked on a more manual method, which still involves some sort of scraping. So the main idea was we realized that the PDF actually does contain real data. Of course, you could, the person setting up the Tableau could completely lock down the PDF. They didn't in this case, they fully. And so we created we went through each of these and downloaded the first 121 of them, which is, as Harlan said, a throwback to an old technique of data, open data, where people had to manually do a whole bunch of work. So you can see the 121 PDFs in here. We didn't do all, there's actually 1,089. And so we then use a tool called Tabula, which is shown here. It can automatically cut out certain parts, and then produced a piece of JSON, which we could then parse and end up with a pivot table, which is what we needed in the first place. So let me just find it, which tab it's in. Okay, so this is the gigantic table that CourtWatch wanted, at least for the first 90% of the cases. Because we only did 100 out of 1,000, but it covers most of the crimes, most of the charges that were given in the state of Massachusetts. So this is a pivot table that shows the data in a more accessible way, and we're really curious to see how the charges data that CourtWatch had us sort of pull out connects to other pieces of the pipeline that have to do with expungement. And so we are less familiar with that because we're very software technical, but we're really interested to know what the lawyer and policy technical folks that have dug into the expungement process can do with this sort of liberated charge data at the county level. So each of these is a county in Massachusetts, and this is how many people were charged, how many charges were made for assault and battery, or there's a lot of credit card, defacing property, etc. So, is there any questions or any other comments by the others?
No, I was just going to mention that this is 2018 data. We found out that the Tableau dashboard was last time that it refreshed was yesterday. So if Mike and Henry can finish automating this, it might be really cool to have this running and have something that is updating almost real time for Crime Watch as well.
Tableau is a data visualization tool. I'm surprised that it was so. I'm surprised you had access to the data, but didn't have access to a more raw version, like a usable version of it. That something about that just seems crazy.
It's often that you can get it, but because in this case it's disabled by the court, we weren't able to get it. We had to do this strange workaround.
This is now a black hat conference.
Especially what they were doing, that was intense. Really old school open data. So yeah, I'm really excited to go into Tuesday and see what both the Clean Slate team and the Court Watch come back with once we turn this over. Thanks everyone.
Hello? Alright, so we put off, oh my. We were working on the usability, actually checking out the website that they had created so far. And it was actually really cool. It's really simple. We created this document, shared it in Slack, so if people want to add their own stuff to it, knowing that we were going in to think about how the website actually worked, we really just hashed all of that out, and I feel kind of bad because there's probably more strengths we can add to it, but we were just really looking at all the design stuff. So.
Yeah, so there were two big things that we focused on in terms of this is the thing that you want to go back in your next iteration to think about, and that's user flow. So if you click on what is expungement, then you get a page that says how confidential is my record, and I was like, wait, what? It answers the question here, and it has a lot of other information, but as a user, I was just how did I get to this page? That kind of thing was the thing we were focusing on. Is it easy to get from one place to another, and does it make sense to get from A to B instead of A to D? And there was a B and C in between, but you didn't see it. And the other thing that we focused on was accessibility. So if you go back to the homepage, so this clear your record is an image, which means that if you're using a screen reader, then all of that text you can't actually, it won't read it to you. So if you have any kind of vision problems or otherwise need a screen reader for any reason, then you're just gonna miss all of that information that is meant to introduce you to this website. So those are the two big things we focused on, was user flow and accessibility. I organized what we did into the navigation of the website, where things would go and lead to, and then just different elements the actual menu, the actual footer, which is the thing all the way at the bottom, and then we went more into like different pages and like what different pages should say. So like for example here, in the home page, it has the buttons. What is expungement? Sorry, I can't actually read from here because I can't see. I know I have glasses on, it's a problem. Anyway, so.
It also speaks to like one of the main concerns of like how small some of the text is and like the coloring too. So we started looking at like kind of like the styling of some of these elements.
Yeah, so for someone like me, because I can't see really well, what I find very readable is very big font. So, but just for the average user, something like the size of the font on the orangey, whatever salmon color that is, like that's pretty readable. What's in the nav bar is less so. So that's font you want to be bigger because then it's easier to read. And we didn't notice it because we didn't look at this particular size, but they are also getting closer together, which can also potentially be an issue because there's nothing to separate it. And then it just kind of all flows into like one big thing and you can't tell that these are actually separate sets of words. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, and then eventually it moves all those buttons into that.
Yeah, so exactly something like that. What was I talking about? Oh yes, so the buttons here too is like what is expungement, am I eligible, and why does it matter? And thinking about like the order that's in of like which like the order you would ask those questions to yourself, and that's generally the order that you would go through the website. So thinking about that as well. And I should stop talking now.
We also worked with whichever the group with the large poster. I can't remember what your group was actually called.
Journey mapping.
Journey mapping. So one of the things we talked about is like understanding who the actual users of the website are and what they are looking for. So someone who is actually looking to have their record expunged is going to have a different flow through this than someone who is trying to be an advocate or, trying to petition the government to change the way expungement works. Well, those two cases can be like the same thing, but for this in particular, understanding who's using it, how they're using it, and what information they want in what order is going to be really important. Then one of the other things that we covered was in order to use the site, you first have to find the site. And so search engine optimization is going to be fairly important. If you try to Google expunge MA, I actually don't know where this comes up, but the first thing that comes up is the Massachusetts website for it, which, although that's good, is not, honestly the information isn't laid out as neatly and nicely as this website has it. This website has a lot of really useful information, a lot of really useful links, and a really nice kind of like questionnaire that you go through in order to figure out whether or not you are eligible. So like basically the main bones of the website, the most important parts of it are there. They're really good. It's just about kind of reconfiguring a few small little details in order to make it so that search engines want to take you there and so that it's a useful interaction for the people you're trying to help. And I think that's it. Any questions?
Did you find out what content management system or like how this was built?
This is a Squarespace site.
Yeah, and I'm not super familiar with Squarespace, so like if some of our like styling things like can't be addressed because of it, like I have no idea, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is one of the issues.
That's pretty limiting.
Yeah, you guys know more about that. Different CMSs have different restrictions on you and different, kind of speed to get things going. Squarespace is theoretically quick and easy to get things going, but a lot more restrictions than, let's say, WordPress or custom coding a website. Anyone else?
Great. Is this it? Okay, I think this is our last one. Is that right? Okay, cool. Okay, It'll be done by 4:30, 15 minutes after. Super great. Sorry I did a crap job timekeeping. But yeah, super excited.
I think you just take off the adapter, maybe?
What's back? What's back?
She
Wrong
has,
dongle thing.
she has her own notes, okay.
My computer flashed.
So we worked on the, can people hear me? Do I need the microphone?
Yes.
Okay, so we worked on the school to prison data sets. So working with the Code for Boston, or sorry, with the Citizens for Juvenile Justice team. Go ahead. And so, awesome. So for a little bit of context to review what Sana talked about earlier today, there were three major recent law changes. One of which was that the minimum age of arrest went from 7 to 12, so you can no longer arrest an elementary school student in Massachusetts. Just seems like very necessary. Number two, we actually have to clarify with her what has happened versus what they're trying to make happen. We had some confusion about it, but in general, we know there's more of a focus on diversion, so sending offending students to community service instead of prison, and trying to work to basically rehabilitate them and work with the challenges that they have instead of just sending them straight to jail. And then expansion of expungement eligibility, so the changed laws that allow more people to apply for expungement. So for context on the data we were specifically looking at, we had 4 data sets that were given to us by SANA, one of which, well, the first 2 of which were Massachusetts school disciplinary data. One was by the district and one was by individual school, and we learned, one of the first things we learned by looking at that was that the second data set actually encompasses all that's in the first data set, so that's a useful thing to let them know. The third data set was about arrests in Springfield, Massachusetts on their actual school campuses from 2017 to 2019. And then the fourth one was the Mass Edu school profile data, so more information on demographics and sort of background information on who goes to the schools. So today's goal for us was about looking at those data sets and understanding what that data is going to be able to actually tell us. So the report out that Senna asked for was basically what kinds of analyses could be useful for this data to actually get value out of it, especially for comparison between school issues versus arrests. So when, like, what makes the difference between a student being punished just within the school system versus being sent to jail or arrested. And especially within the context of these recent changes that have been happening in the law, we want to better understand how and what kinds of changes are intentional with those laws that seem on the outside very positive, and we'll get into more about how they might potentially backfire, but basically understanding that the data follows up what we want to be happening. And then also what are in general some research questions that CFJJ can use moving forward to continue to get value out of this data. You want to take over? I'm very practiced.
Sure. So basically we discovered a bunch of questions along the way. The first thing, which Gracie kind of already mentioned, was that our first 2 data sets that we received actually contained, basically, the first data set contained almost entirely the data of the second. So that was a good thing to discover. We had a couple of questions about the data, just in that, like, how the age in school matched with the ages in an arrest, like the arrests data set, because Sana seemed to think that there was some age missing in the arrest data set. We also, looking at that data set of arrests, saw these acronyms and 2s and 3s, which we thought maybe were rankings, but didn't really know. And then we looked at a couple of other things, like how schools were broken up and what actually, like, some of the terms meant. And then we were looking for more specifics just in terms of arrest data because we did not have very many and that would have been helpful down the road.
Awesome tidbit. One thing that we also discovered actually before, like when we were talking to Senna at lunchtime, was the overlapping data also had, like the way it was cataloged within the data sets was overlapping. So there were some rows that encompassed, like for instance, it would break down by gender. So like male and then female of a certain race. And then there'd be another one that was that certain race with no male or female gender attached. And that encompassed both male and female. But there was no real indication that that was done in some cases. So it wasn't even consistently laid out like with a particular tree format. So she was really grateful to hear about that from the beginning because her team was about to publish results from a study they'd done and like some analysis they'd done, and they didn't understand that that was there. So we were glad to catch that.
What if we did a demo and then went back to this? Or like showing that? Oh, okay. Or like the demo.
Okay.
So
fine, the data is fine. Okay, so these are screenshots of, I think these are from the original report. These aren't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to ask something?
This is also doubling as a report to send to Santa and the team, which is why there's so much happening.
So we got a bunch of information. They did a report in 2012 about some of the data they originally had, and so we wanted to mimic based on new data, similar sorts of questions, but then also new sorts of things too. We found out, for example, to Senna's point about just because you have one incident, you may actually have multiple charges against you. We found on average you're going to have more than 2 charges against you for a certain incident, and then it kind of differs between male, female, or if you're white, black, or Hispanic too. So we have a whole bunch of data that we can do, but again, a lot of it is cleaning up the data and working through that. And Rachel can talk more about that.
So we all, since all we were really doing today was exploring the data, we kind of came at it from all different angles. Tim was working with Excel and looking at pivot tables, which another group showed earlier. I was using what I'm used to, which is, I don't like the layout, sorry, I'm trying to move this application, but doesn't want to.
But because you're in full screen,
You're right, that's probably true. Okay, so our studio has a pretty cool thing called our notebook, which is similar to Jupyter Notebook and interactive like MATLAB things. So I just started by loading up the data, and a few people mentioned we had 2 data sets, one that was already aggregated by district and one that was aggregated by school. But then there are a bunch of other pieces of information in those files. So it had race and ethnicity, it had gender, and then it also would denote if these were students with disabilities, if they were English language learners, if they were economically disadvantaged, which we found out is not the same as below the poverty line. They have, the Massachusetts DOE has its own definition for economically disadvantaged. And then it gave a number of students disciplined and then number of students within that category. And then at least at the district level, it gave a percentage. So then we could look at what is actually in those tables. And I renamed them to make them more readable. And then what we wanted to do first was identify we saw that there was overlapping stuff, so what was overlapping. So I also pulled out within the school aggregated set, it had the state totals, then it had district totals, and then within the district, it then had the schools. So there was a lot of basically we have to figure out if these are aggregated numbers or if these are numbers like in addition to the specific ones. So Gracie already mentioned the example of having both or all three of male, female, and none. Is that empty one? Is that non-binary? Is that etc. And I think we're mostly out of time. So was there? So yeah. So just moving forward, the big question here was how are arresting practices changing with changing legislation? Are we actually achieving what we hope to achieve, which is maybe more regular school discipline and less arrests and putting kids in prison? And then we just are giving CFJJ as much information about their data that we can. Thank you. Yeah, that.
Can we I see a sun battery there, which we just saw in our data set. Do you think there's any basis of comparison if we were to like look at the higher level categories or something between
So there are higher level categories that they used in the 2012 report that our team found. And so part of our task during today was actually categorizing all of those into the 5 categories. So we did that in order to get some of our data.
Excellent. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, we got one last one.
I just wanted to clarify, the data sets were specifically for like K through 12 public schools, right? They didn't have no information on private schools or
So it was mostly public schools. Sana's understanding of the data that she gave us was that it was all public schools. But if you, like when I sorted by name, the top one ended up, it's a charter but also public. So there's like a little bit of overlap. And then actually one of the places where the district aggregated data set had stuff that the school aggregated data set did not was this Greenfield Commonwealth Virtual. So maybe that's an online high school. We didn't have time to look it up. But yeah, so mostly it's public, but there's a little bit of stuff.
Any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you.
Does everybody have their dongles? Well, that was pretty cool, huh? Yeah? I don't really have any wise closing words or anything like that, except to say that the work that you've all put together is really amazing, and it's going to be so useful to our partners and to us and to any advocates who are looking to sort of like further criminal justice reform here in Massachusetts. I know that CFJJ is super happy. The people at Court Watch have been tweeting me at the Code for Boston account for the last 4 hours. So like, there's a lot of action going on here. I think the work that we're doing, even in this preliminary sort of state, is actually getting people really excited and making a difference. So thank you all. Give yourselves a hand. I hope that after this we'll see your faces around Code for Boston a little bit more. We meet every week, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the CIC in Cambridge. We're right off the Red Line. You can hit us up on Meetup. And yeah, we'll provide like space and hosting and pizza to keep your projects going. And we hope that they don't just stay here at Isotope. We hope that you'll continue working with us on them. So thanks again. This has been a great day. I would like to do one last thing before you take off, if people still have a little bit of patience to hang out with us, which is I'd love to take a group picture. Does that sound cool? If